to the Cult of the Dead Dove podcast. I'm your host, Jay, and this is our very first episode. I'm very excited to finally be doing this. Today, just a little disclaimer, we will be talking about mature topics, so if you are a younger or sensitive audience, please keep that in mind. Today, we're going to be talking about the woman who fucked a dolphin. The story of Margaret Lovatt and the dolphinarium. Dolphinarium? I think is how it is pronounced. So I'm just going to jump right into this story because it's a wild ride from start to finish. So today we're going to be talking about Margaret Howe Lovatt, who was born in 1942. I couldn't find a whole lot of background about her other than her entire passion for researching animals and teaching animals human language was inspired by a book called Miss Kelly, where a cat communicates with people when she was a child. And this one book is basically the reason all of this happened, so you can blame that book. So in her 20s, she lived on the Caribbean islands of St. Thomas to help research dolphins with Gregory Bateson, who was the director of the lab. Now, she didn't really have a whole lot of actual scientific training, but she kind of showed up and was like, hello, I want to be here. And they're like, all right, welcome to the program. Because I guess, it's the 60s, so what else are you going to do when someone walks up to you and is like, I want to research dolphins, but I don't have anything to prove that I can do that? It's the 60s. We don't need proof. She also worked with John Lilly, who was a neuroscientist with the California Institute of Technology. I personally believe John Lilly is the craziest person in this story, and here's a few fun reasons why. So he was building a research lab with funding from the U.S. Navy and NASA with the end goal of speaking to extraterrestrial life forms. He also eventually wanted dolphins to have a seat in the United Nations. So that's also an interesting idea. But also, it's the 60s. So everyone's probably on drugs. Back to the story. So to start, they built what they called the Dolphinarium, which was essentially just a big research center for dolphins. But it was built so that you could accommodate dolphins and humans to study them super up close. So John Lilly had 3 dolphins. There were 2 girls, Sissy and Pamela, and then a younger male, Peter, who was a bottlenose dolphin, and he is also the star of our story today. All of these dolphins, fun fact, were from Marine Studios after co-starring in Flipper, which is fun. They're actors. So in 1964, the dolphinarium was fully functional, and he assigned Margaret to start training the dolphins. The end goal of this whole experiment was to teach them human language, which is also why I think drugs were probably involved. So the experiment ran for 2 years total. During the time, John and Margaret tried a bunch of different approaches to prove that human language could be mimicked. And the theory was they could make the sounds with the dolphins' blowholes. So let's talk about Margaret's descent into what I think is madness. So she had this theory, which, to be fair, is a decent theory, that if she lived with the dolphins, she could teach them human speech the way a mother teaches a child, and the experiment would be a success. Which is a good theory, but also you're trying to teach dolphins English, so I have this quote. All of my quotes today come from theguardian.com, so thank you, The Guardian. Maybe it was because I was living so close to the lab. It just seemed so simple. Why let the water get in the way? She says. So I said to John Lilly, I want to plaster everything and fill this place with water. I want to live here. End quote. Which actually sounds kind of fun, like if I could go live with dolphins. I don't know if I'd say no. Flood my room, toss a couple dolphins in there, it's a party, if you know what I'm saying. So, she ended up spending all of her time with Peter alone. I couldn't exactly figure out why him specifically instead of one of the girls. I think it helped that he was a little bit younger than them. And she wanted to really grab onto that theory that, you need a younger dolphin, like a child, to teach them. Because, it's a mammal, so their brains are probably a little bit more susceptible to learning. Kind of like if you learn a second language younger, it's going to be easier than if you try it when you're older. That's just my theory. I'm not, a doctor or anything. But she ended up spending all of her time alone with him. Another quote, Peter liked to be with me. He would rub himself on my knee or my foot or my hand, and I allowed that. I was comfortable with that as long as it wasn't too rough. So if you don't know what's being implied, is he was a, young hormonal teenager, essentially. That's Dolphin. And, he's hanging out with this lady all the time, and things got a little spicy, a little frisky. So at first, when that would happen, Margaret would send him to go hang out with the girl dolphins for a day. I read that they sent him down the elevator, so that's fun. But then after a while, it was just easier, I guess, to let it happen so Peter could focus on learning English. Which is this is where it gets weirder. If it wasn't weird before. Essentially, Margaret, quote-unquote, jacks off a dolphin. And I don't know how. I read too many things about dolphin sex. Way too many. I know too much now. I'm scarred for life. And I still don't know how that would work. At all. If you know, don't tell me, because I don't really want to know that bad. But I guess, let me know, because what? In the interviews afterwards, because this kind of got out, and there are some really funny articles from the 60s about it, with this over-the-top artwork, and this woman is having sex with a dolphin. So it got out, and it was a big thing for a while. So eventually, in the 2000s, she did some interviews about it. And she said that it was only sexual on Peter's part, not on her own. At best, it was quote-unquote sensuous for her. Which doesn't make it better. It almost makes it worse. Here's another quote. It was like an itch. Just scratch it and be done. That's really all it was. The thing is, when I was watching this interview, this woman was way too casual about it. She's like, it was nothing. And I was like, are you? That's a kind of bestiality. So yes, it's a problem. It's not just an itch. This happened multiple times. And essentially, Peter, fell madly in love with her, which is another quote directly from that interview, which was part of the documentary The Girl Who Talked to Dolphins. So here's where things start to end. So John Lilly, the guy I was talking about before, because it was the 60s, began to research LSD and injected the dolphins from time to time with it to study the effects. He was super upset because nothing happened. Which is funny because if there was one animal that like LSD wouldn't affect, of course it would be dolphins. They're just so chill already. They're like, here's some drugs. And they're like, nah, man. I already got it all up here in my little brain. So Margaret did not like that they were injecting the dolphins with LSD because who would? That's really weird. And I think it would count as animal abuse, but I guess we'll ignore that. But her only request was that Peter would not be injected with it, which was respected. But she said that she felt really, I guess, weird because, you know, she was like in her 20s, 30s, and she was asking this old scientist guy who was running the thing, and, hey, can you not do that? You know, it's the 60s, so women don't speak out of turn and ask for things. God, that's a joke, everybody. Don't come after me, please. But eventually, almost 6 months after Margaret and Peter started to stay together, the program's funding was cut because it was unsuccessful. At best, they could get the dolphins to like mimic some sounds with their blowholes, but they couldn't, like, there was no real communication going on. And then, you know, they find out that they're just giving dolphins some LSD for fun, and they're like, okay, I think it's time to shut this down. But at this time, Margaret had grown really, really close to Peter. The relationship of having to be together sort of turned into really enjoying being together and wanting to be together and missing him when he wasn't there. And she says, I did have a very close encounter with, I can't even say a dolphin, with Peter. Listen, lady. So after the program was cut, obviously they have to send dolphins away because they're shutting down this whole building. So they moved him to Miami to a disused bank building, which I thought was interesting. But he had been Peter, the dolphin, had been used to living, like, essentially with the woman of, like, the love of his life in a really nice facility with lots of sunlight and, you know, room to move, and all of a sudden he's moved away from the love of his life to a, you know, much smaller, very cramped building. There was not a lot of sunlight. So after a few weeks, Margaret receives a phone call, and she learns that Peter, the dolphin, had killed himself. And you're probably thinking, how does a dolphin kill itself? Well, do I have a little quote for you. Dolphins are not automatic air breathers like we are. Every breath is a conscious effort, which this is not part of the quote, but that sounds like a lot of work. Can you imagine having to think every time you breathe, just, oh, oops, it's been 3 minutes. I gotta breathe again. I almost forgot. That sounds horrible. Back to the quote. Okay, if life becomes too unbearable, the dolphins just take a breath and they sink to the bottom. They don't even take the next breath. And that is so sad to me. They literally, like, broke this little dolphin's heart. So his death was put down, like, due to a broken heart. Brought on by the separation from Margaret that, like, he didn't understand because it's a dolphin. And he's like, sorry. Why? Am I no longer with my lady? Margaret could rationalize it, but when she left, could Peter? The love of his life is gone. End quote. That's so, God, it's so sad. Margaret was not incredibly beat up about it. she said that it was odd, and, obviously she thought it was sad that he was in poor condition, but, to her it was what it was. Which I think is just even more sad. That she's like, oh, yeah, he's dead, but it's a dolphin, and, it's whatever. And it's like, oh, but he loved you, which is weird, kind of, because it was, it's a very different way that people and animals love each other normally, but still. So, in the end, John Lilly, our favorite scientist, continued to study dolphin and human communications. He was trying out some interesting ways to talk to them, including telepathy he tried. He tried musical tones. I don't really know what that means, but he tried it. But it was unsuccessful, and afterwards no one ever tried to teach dolphins to speak English again. So, lesson learned. Don't teach animals English. Teach them Spanish, obviously. And what happens to good old Margaret? You might be wondering. Well, she stays on the island. She ends up marrying the photographer who captured pictures of the experiment. They moved back into the quote-unquote dolphin house, or the dolphinarium. They eventually just kind of converted it into a family home where they brought up three daughters. Which is kind of weird if you think about it. That you live there, like, does the husband live there knowing that, like, his wife messed around with a dolphin in that building for 6 months? Because I would think about that all the time. I'd be like, you're eating breakfast and you're like, this is where my wife had sex with that dolphin that one time. Huh, okay, cool. I'm gonna go mow the lawn. I don't even know. That's just weird. But in the years that followed, that house ended up falling into disrepair. Last quote is, over the years, I've received letters from people who are working with dolphins themselves. They often say things like, when I was 7, I read about you living with a dolphin, and that's where it all started for me. End quote. Listen, if you read about a lady living with a dolphin, maybe you should question that a little bit more before moving on, but good for you still. So that is our wacky and wild story. I hope you enjoyed it. I want to thank theguardian.com, Wikipedia, of course, mirror.co.uk, and telegraph.co.uk, because that is where I got all my information from. If you had a good time hanging out for a little bit and learning about some weird stuff, go ahead and follow. If you would like to follow us on Instagram, the handle is The Cult of the Dead Dove, or we're also on Twitter at Dead Dove Cult. If you have a story that you want me to cover, you can DM me, tweet at me, or send an email to the Cult of the Dead Dove podcast at gmail.com. Thank you so much for listening. Stay safe, take care of yourself, and as always, don't eat the dead dove. Thanks for listening. Bye-bye.